I have a hard time not being incredibly rude during conversations. It's very hard for me to be self-aware. I have lived with my own disappointment for most of my life. Hey guys, what's up? Today I want to talk to you about what it's like living with adult ADHD. But I also want to talk to you about the 3 steps that I took to not only make it more manageable, but to start to gain control and overcome it. So my understanding of what ADHD is neurologically is the lack of a dopamine receptor in the prefrontal cortex. So this means the lack of feeling rewarded when making good choices or being proud of yourself from doing something. It's almost like it takes a high reward to feel really satisfied with something that's been done or experienced. Additionally, it's a common misconception that ADHD means that you're just hyperactive. There's actually 2 types of ADHD, the hyperactive type and the compulsive behavior type. I have been diagnosed with a moderate combination of both. Some of the strengths of ADHD is hypersensitivity to feeling their emotions, as well as hyper focus on the things that they feel rewarded by and really enjoy or like to pursue. So our theme this month in the Level Up program has been about understanding your system better. And knowing your system, you can learn how to leverage and optimize it so that you can function and utilize your brain, your body, your health, your strengths for the best outcome in your life and business. So what I'm going to share with you today might be common and relatable, or it might be unique and different to you. This is just how adult ADHD has shown up for me. First of all, living with adult ADHD has been very hard. I grew up diagnosed with ADHD. It's a genetic predisposition for me, and my family kind of didn't believe in it at that time. So my mom was kind of just like, run outside and get a lot of energy out and don't eat tons of sugar and you'll be fine. I will say that growing up into my adulthood, there was a lot of things that I didn't really quite understand. I always thought that it was related to some of the post-trauma or like the negative effects of living through a turbulent household and abusive childhood, that I was having these difficulties, but I had no idea that a lot of these came as a result of having ADHD that hadn't been managed. Now, studies show that kids who grow up with ADHD, more often than not, given the right skills and practices, outgrow ADHD by the time they're adults. But genetically speaking, about 8%, maybe 8.1% of the population grow into adults with adult ADHD. That is me. In addition to that, studies are starting to show that adult ADHD is on the rise due to environmental factors that are actually creating this for a lot of us. So if you are a overachiever, a busy mom, an entrepreneur or business owner, a lot of times we have some form of neurodiversity, which is commonly ADD or ADHD. So how has this shown up more strongly or prominently in my life? First things first is achieving and sticking to my goals is extremely tough. I have a tendency to have these large, grandiose, idealistic dreams and perspectives, and this ultimate faith and belief that I can do it all. And this is not the case. I often disappoint myself. I have lived with my own disappointment for most of my life. Fortunately for me, I think my personality is just naturally idealistic and optimistic, that I'm like, it's okay, let's go again. And that has counterweighted the difficulty of sticking to my goals. But I will say that over time, it feels like I get worn out a bit. Like I can see that the doubt creeps in and I start to feel like, man, am I really able to do this? Is it something that I likely can achieve, or am I just, thinking high and mighty of myself? Obviously that question does come in. The second way that ADHD affects me most strongly, and a lot of people who are around me may not notice this unless you spend quite a lot of time with me, I have a hard time not being incredibly rude during conversations. Things will just start to drift in my mind and I might have a blank expression and then go, and it's because I want to listen to you, but then something came up and then that thought ran away with it. I also have a really hard time not getting extremely excited and wanting to be overly detail oriented beyond the point of what is necessary or appealing for most people to sit through in a conversation. So I try very hard to be interested, but if I'm not, you will see me do this. And it's so hard. Like, I don't know how to explain. I think I get better at this skill because, like I said, I'm going to tell you the 3 ways that I've learned to turn this around, but it has been so hard for such a long time. And I often find myself second guessing the way that I show up or behave in a conversation. I feel that it's very hard for me to be self-aware of how I'm behaving and how it comes across at times. And that's something that I've refined and worked on a little bit better from my experience. Even though I might not feel it, I can see external indicators that might point out to how I might be coming across, if that makes sense. So an example of this would be like if I'm on my period and I'm a bit more sharp and I'm a little bit more edgy in my tone of voice and I like have this punchy enunciations. You've probably experienced that here in my videos. Like sometimes I'm more calm and other times when it's right before my period, I get really punchy and like passionate and I sound aggressive in the way that I speak compared to, other times. And I don't really notice that. I remember this one time I was speaking to our intercom in the house. We have like Google and you can say, "Hey Google, make an announcement."
Sorry, something's not right.
She thought I was talking to her, but you can make announcements through that thing. And I remember it being like, "Hey girls, can you come down? Dinner's ready," or something like that. And it plays it back and you can hear it echo through the whole house. And it sounded like, "Hey girls, come down, dinner's ready." And I was like, did I really sound like that? It's like, let me try again. "Hey girls, do you want to come down? Dinner's ready." Then it played through the house and it came out like, "Hey girls, did you want to come down? Dinner's ready." And I was like, what is going on right now? Like, I do not feel internally the way that sounds. So that's a really interesting thing that I experience and something that I have to be really careful of just due to the way my brain is wired. Number 3 is very similar to number 1, which is inconsistencies in behavior. And it's relevant to number 1 because the goal thing, I wanted to explain how it felt going through the goals, but what it looks like from the outside is I might say, I am so excited to start my new diet, which is a sugar-free diet. And then that weekend, you might catch me eating something with sugar. Or I might say, I'm really intent on focusing on my business right now, and that's the only thing that matters. And then 3 months later, I adopt a new puppy. And what I find this comes from is the lack of receiving dopamine rewards for the simple things. So what I notice in my ADHD is that the inconsistency in behavior is largely driven by the desire or the need to feel rewarded. So I might say I'm starting a new sugar-free diet and I might do really well with that for the first 2 weeks and it might feel really hard. So my mind justifies it. And I know that probably most people feel this. I just think that oftentimes ADHD people feel this to the nth degree of like, I really should just reward myself with this because if I don't, I lose all motivation, focus, drive, or anything to continue on with my diet because I don't feel those prefrontal cortex dopamine receptor rewards of I'm proud of myself. I did a really good job. So the 4th challenge that I experienced with ADHD is low EQ. In my early adulthood, it was very difficult for me to have awareness of other people's feelings when I'm so hyper-focused on the experience of my own. This is not just due to ADHD. This is due to living in an environment where I had parents with low EQ and not really having any good examples or exercises in practicing high IQ. So this has been a very hyper focus for me over the last 15 plus years of my life, as undoing all of those things have been fairly difficult. Low EQ really shows up in my inability or lack of ability to efficiently process my emotions and get over things and see them clearly, despite the fact that maybe cognizantly I understand what is practical or right. I often question the way that I feel in relation to how I see things. There is a lack of trust there in myself sometimes to have better judgment because of these inconsistencies that I've experienced with myself in my own life. It doesn't necessarily help the situation. If anything, it can worsen the situation because you increase in self-doubt. Sometimes I'm so sure that I'm sane-minded and I'm thinking really clearly about a particular topic or situation, and then I realize that my period or eating sugar the other day or whatever else, other variables that pile onto that can affect and even dampen the way that I see things or put a filter over my lens, despite how confident and sure I feel of being fair in those situations. So because of this, I have had to learn to have a lot of humility to own my mistakes, see them, accept them, ask for forgiveness, or try to correct them as soon as possible. I have also had to learn not to jump to conclusions and especially really sit on things for a long while, like a lot longer than I would expect. And so this comes down to social situations or even situations with clients that might not seem good, and even parenting. My kids know that sometimes I'm like, what you did is wrong, but I really have to think about the consequence for a little while so that I'm not responding out of just sheer emotion, and I can think about this thoroughly and come up with something that is not only fair, but teaches a lesson effectively. The last thing I'm gonna share with you today, because this list can go on, is an excessive amount of mental work. There is a need, I think, for ADHD brains to constantly be satiated with entertainment and dopamine rewards because of the imbalance there in the dopamine receptors. So we're constantly looking for ways to keep our mind busy and take that mental energy and put it to other things. In addition, the way that the ADHD brain is explained to me is that while most people think linearly from point A to point B, kind of like driving a car to a destination, ADHD works in a flood. And I experience this often in that when something comes to mind or somebody's asking me a question, there's this flood of ideas that are relevant and even sometimes barely relevant to the topic or question at hand. And it takes me a moment to stop and process and think, okay, which one is actually important to what we're going to be talking about here, because my mind just wants to go far and wide very quickly. So we tend to satiate this way of thinking or even comfort ourselves or distract ourselves from this way of thinking, because it can be absolutely exhausting, by busying ourselves all the time. Of course, when you hear about all these things, not reaching our goals, impulsive or inconsistent behavior, low EQ, being rude in conversations, as well as mentally overworking or overloading ourselves, this leads to overwhelm and exhaustion overall in our lives, in our experience, and it can lead us, at least it's definitely led me, to feeling like, what is wrong with me? So a fun story is that I came back around to this idea of ADHD because my daughter was exhibiting symptoms, weird symptoms and weird behaviors, and we were like, something's off here. And so we got a behavioral psychologist to kind of help us as parents navigate through this and also help with her, and we discovered that she also had combined type ADHD. And I started to read about it, and as I was reading, I started to think, this is starting to fill in a lot of holes and make a lot of sense to me. So before I get into what it is that I did, the 3 steps that I do to address and manage my ADHD, I want to say that just by understanding my neurological disposition, I felt a lot more empathy and a lot more understanding. And also it made me aware that certain processes or certain tips or advice or ways that people normally did things in order to overcome challenges wasn't necessarily the most efficient route for me. So let's talk about what it is that I do. And I'm just going to try to simplify this in 3 different steps. The first step is I needed to change the way I framed things, because certain processes worked for most people. Like my husband says, it's all practical. You set a goal, this is what you want, remind yourself of your why and do it, and stay committed to doing it every single day. Well, I realized for me what works a lot better is, instead of setting this high overarching goal, atomic habits, like James Clear, that sort of just to commit to something small that is easy and makes you feel successful because you've gotten it done and you've followed through. Those kind of habits lead to bigger habits for me. And instead of feeling defeated and the lack of the reward that it's already difficult for my brain to receive, I feel good because I've stayed consistent. I've done the 5 minutes of yoga every single morning, or the 1 page of reading that I committed to every single day. And I do this with consistency. And over time, that consistency changes the way that I feel, and it starts to amplify my sensitivity to those kind of rewards, the delayed gratification type stuff. So the second step is to replace the process knowing this. So instead of, I just wanna like watch this movie right now because I am looking for a dopamine hit, I'm looking for comfort, and I'm feeling just really out of whack mentally or imbalanced. Instead of that, I say, okay, well, I'll make a deal with myself. If I read my 1 page of my book, or if I read another page of my book, or if I X, Y, and Z, then I will watch the movie. So my day will kind of look like this. I definitely want to get these 1, 2, maybe 3 items done. And if I can get 4 or 5, it's a bonus. Whereas a lot of people say you can probably focus on about 5 good things for an hour or 2 each. I try to stick to 2, max 3 most important things. And by having this window of I'm still successful by completing these couple very important things, and even more successful if I can get to 4 and 5, I receive an immense reward by being successful in either scenario. And it feels really good. So that leads me to step 3, which is changing the reward system. So just in implementing this process, we already changed the reward system. But at the end of the day, knowing this, I can leverage that reward system to encourage myself to do things I don't want to do. So by stacking things at the front of the day that is difficult or most hard, and then moving it towards the things at the end of the day that are most rewarding. And a lot of times I'll end the day with, if I finish this, I'm gonna play this game with my family, or I'm gonna take my family out for smoothies, or fill in the blank. I make something highly rewarding that I look forward to at the end of the day. So I'm editing this video in my PJs right now, drinking my smoothie. And ADHD, it's the topic, but I realized I failed to mention that when I hit that bonus, this is where I reward myself with the movie or the yummy treat or whatever it is that I set as that reward. But at the same time, even if I get that first 3 frogs done, then I'm still rewarded. Then I feel even more motivated to accomplish the extra 4 or 5 as a bonus. But either way, it's a win-win. And that keeps me motivated to move through the hard stuff of my day and to feel really good about that reward that I give myself at the end. The key to this is making sure that the reward that is given at the end is actually something that still contributes towards your goals. It wouldn't contribute to me if I said, we're gonna get a bunch of Oreo cookies and marshmallows and just stuff our faces with them while watching, TikTok videos. Like, those would do the opposite. So it always brings me back to the lessons we teach in the Level Up program, which is to lean into what adds value and to let go of the things that do not. You got to do what it takes. You can't argue with reality. And if your brain operates this way, it's 1 + 1 = 2. And so instead of wishing that I could have tons of sugar like most people, or wishing that I didn't have such a hard time being rude in conversations, it's just, what can we do about it? And how can I make that really rewarding for myself? So I try to find ways to reframe what it is that I'm after and why, whilst changing the process and making sure I give myself a healthy reward after. It does take a little bit of work, and you do stumble over time, and sometimes you're like, I tried that and it's not rewarding. But if you just keep at it, then your adult ADHD starts to look like high performance, high efficiency. And by overcoming a lot of these challenges, that exhaust and overwhelm turns into pride and exhilaration and motivation and satisfaction. And so I hope that in sharing this process with you, you get something out of it if you're experiencing some of these things. If you don't know whether you have ADHD or not, I do recommend always getting tested just so you understand your neurological landscape. And understanding how your brain and body function and behave, you can best optimize your system to best serve you. So thanks for listening to this. I know it was a long-winded video. There's a lot of information that I wanted wanted to share. But if you have any thoughts or questions, as always, leave them in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao for now.